Welcome into Unpaid Interns. I'm Griffin Epstein. Happy Monday morning. We are live on IU Sports Media YouTube page. I'm Griffin Epstein, hosting my first show today, and I think I chose a pretty good day to host my first show after an incredible weekend that will go down in IU sports history as one we will never forget. Austin Render is joining me, as well as Jack Grossman. He is, of course, an IU grad and now working at ESPN 680 and 939 The Ville, two sports radio stations in Louisville. Jack, thanks so much for coming on. What an incredible weekend. What were just your reactions to the game on Saturday?
I mean, it was stunning. They didn't do the IU football thing. They did blow the lead, but then instead of just lying down and taking a 28-20 loss or a 21-20 loss, they came back. They made the big plays they needed to, even before they blew the lead. They got that 4th and 1 stop on 4th down. They drove down the field to score a touchdown and tie the game. They got the controversial call to go their way with the Michael Penix 2-point conversion. It was for Indiana football to finally do the Tom Allen breakthrough thing and get the win over a top 10 team that they've been looking for so long. It was the most Indiana football way to do it. And honestly, I think it's the most fitting way for them to do it.
Yeah, it was a truly incredible game. I guess the biggest question is why now did it happen? Why did they break through now after so many times, falling and in short? And obviously, we can debate the dive to the pylon. Was it the pylon? Was it the goal line? We can get into that a little bit later. But why were they able to finally put themselves in that opportunity after it seemed like, they were dead in the water, and it was, as you said, same old Indiana football once again?
Yeah, that really is the $1 million question for Indiana football. Why was it this time? My opinion is it's Tom Allen's been building this program in the right direction, and you always hear that you don't just take a huge leap going from 2-3 win teams that Indiana had been for so long to suddenly 8-9 wins beating Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan's. It's a lot of steps. So for Indiana, as we know, it was a very long process of really starting when Kevin Wilson took over, getting to the point to where they were winning 5-6 games a year, and then Tom Allen, even with the 8-win season last year, I mean, the best win, as great as it was 5-7 Nebraska. And as big of a win that was for Indiana, 5-7 Nebraska doesn't really move the needle much nationally. It's not really the big splash win over a top 5, top 10, top 15 opponent you've been waiting for. So for me, it was the next natural step in the progression for Indiana football. I'm not saying they're going to go out and go 8-0 and win the Big Ten or anything right now, or even beat a Michigan or Ohio State. That would be the next logical step for them. But these things don't just happen smoothly in a linear fashion. It goes more up and down, curvy type of way. So for Indiana, though, that was the next step to finally beat one of those 3 teams. Since 1968, against Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, Indiana was 4-104-1 before Saturday's game. They had lost 72 of the last 73 against those teams. And the one win was when Penn State was dealing with the Sandusky stuff. So, yes, it counts, but that's not nearly the same type of win this game was for Indiana. So I just think it was just where Indiana's building as a program, the fact that they have talent to compete with these teams. I'm not saying they're as talented as a Penn State, but you have a lot more talent on the offensive side, even though it didn't really show until the end. And the defense really, really said, if you told me Indiana was going to win a defensive struggle against one of these teams, and that's how they were going to finally win one of these games. Yes, I know Tom Allen's a defensive guy, but I especially knowing IU sports, I would have laughed at you. And that's not a slight at the defense at all, but usually the way you see a lot of these teams get upset, it's because the offense goes crazy. It's not usually the defense stepping up, stopping a really good offense even without Jordy Brown, and being able to keep your team in the game, give your team short fields, which Indiana converted off of, and be able to really be the reason why your team had a chance to tie the game and win it late.
Jack, I want to keep pushing off the pylon stuff as long as possible. Let's talk Penix here. I mean, I think it's safe to say he was not good for 3.5 quarters, even 3.5+ quarters of this game. but I said this on Saturday. Winners make winning plays. And he had something extra there at the end of the game. He took it upon himself, scored both touchdowns, scored both 2-point conversions, threw some really incredible balls on that last drive. What impressed you from the way he responded to what might be one of his worst games in his football career?
I mean, for 3.5 quarters, it absolutely was his worst game of his career. I mean, he looked like a guy that hadn't played a game since November 2nd of 2019. Almost a full year. I think, 355 days, something like that, very close to a full year. And he looked rusty. He really did for a long time. But to be able to throw all that aside, throw even, the 4 and out right before the final drive where Indiana drove down and scored the touchdown, that's something that Indiana just doesn't do. That's not something that we've seen them be able to handle the adversity, handle things getting tough, and be able to push through it and be able to win a game despite struggling mightily for a large majority of the game. That to me, a lot of that goes to Michael Penix, obviously, but also the culture and the confidence Tom Allen has instilled into his players to where you can have that bad of a game, but the rest of the team picks you up, gives you a chance to win, and knowing that the head coach has the confidence in you that you will deliver gives yourself a lot more confidence. It lets you play a lot more freely to where you can be able to bet yourself off the mat, be able to make those throws, be able to get some really good catches on the back ends from the receivers also, to where you can be able to do something that, hasn't been done in Bloomington for a very long time.
Jack, you mentioned it on the other side for Indiana, the defense. I mean, a lot of the talk this offseason was, we know the offense is going to put points on the board. We know they're going to be pretty good this year for IU because of their weapons, but the defense was inconsistent, didn't step up in those big games. I mean, man, it wasn't that they just stepped up against Penn State, but in the first half, forcing three turnovers. IU got 10 points off that, continuing even in the second half when they were on the field for a total of 40 minutes throughout the game, a ridiculous amount of time, until that final touchdown by Penn State with Jahan Dotson with just a few minutes left. They didn't break. I mean, what was the difference in the defense finally putting it all together?
Well, they didn't break. That really is the difference. The defensive line played really good the entire game. They didn't just let Penn State bully them up front, which is what we saw in the game last year. Penn State won the game basically at the end with a 18-play, 75-yard drive that ate up 9 minutes of the clock. That was the difference in the game up in Happy Valley last season. The defensive line didn't let that happen. They only gave up 4.8 yards per carry, and that's kind of inflated by the long Sean Clifford touchdown at the end of the third quarter. The defense was really, really good. There's just no way to get around it. They forced the plays. Yes, Sean Clifford missed on a couple passes that led to picks, but you still have to actually pick the ball off, which isn't always a given, knowing not just, I'm not saying Indiana secondary, but any secondary. There's a reason why these guys are playing defense. They're not usually great at catching the ball. So you got to be able to take advantage of the bad throws and get those interceptions, which Indiana did. I was sitting there thinking about the time possession aspect of this game, even in the second quarter. When Penn State had that long drive, technically their second to last drive of the half, where they were just kind of eating up clock, slowly moving the ball downfield. And Indiana's defense looked tired at that point. And they were bailed out by being able to force a fumble. Jamar Johnson made a great play to punch the ball loose, and then Indiana ended up recovering the ball. So that kind of delayed the aspect of the defense breaking from that standpoint. They use halftime as a little bit of a reset. They don't get any help from the offense. He only gets one first down in that third quarter. So they were on the field literally, I think, for the last 12 minutes of that third quarter after Indiana punted on their first drive. They were on the field for all 12 minutes except for 4 plays. Like no defense stands up to that. Alabama's defense can't handle that. That Georgia's defense can't handle that. Ohio State's defense can't handle that. And you just don't see a defense be able to hold up for that long. And Indiana, yes, they did finally break with the Sean Clifford touchdown and the Dotson long touchdown. But even in the middle of that, they got enough stops to keep the offense in it, to give them that one last gasp of a chance. And for me, no play better signifies that than the 4th and 1. One stop they had with about 5 minutes left. There's no reason why Indiana should have been able to stop Penn State on that 4th and 1. They had been on the field forever. Penn State has all these 4 or 5-star linemen and running back and Sean Clifford to run the ball. And just everything tells you that just from a traditional aspect. Penn State has a 4th and 1. Indiana's defense is trying to stop you. What's going to happen? They're going to run the ball for 3 yards and a first down. That's just what happens in history. And for Indiana to finally stand up and say, no, that's not what's going to happen this time. For me, even though Penn State took the lead after that, that was as much of a defining moment in this game as anything for me.
This game had so many twists and turns to it, but I think for the most part, I don't know if I'm off basis here by saying this, but this might have been one of Indiana's, when you look back at the amount of top 10, top 15 teams they've been so close to beating, I think they played the worst in this game, at least offensively, because it was so bad. I mean, 50 yards of offense in the second half until that last drive. Why? I mean, is there something about Tom Allen? Is there something about this team that makes them different? Because it was so weird, because it's one of those games that Indiana was just like trying to hold on to something the entire second half, and they lost their grip, but somehow they were able to get it back. This did not feel like usual Indiana at the end of this game.
Well, it did for a minute there. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because the last time Indiana actually beat a top 10 team against Michigan in 1987, it was actually kind of a similar share. I'm not saying these games were, had anything to do with each other, but Indiana got outgained by Michigan by a big amount, but they forced a couple turnovers, had a couple of short drives, got a couple of touchdowns off of it to where they won the game despite being outgained and outpossessed for most of the game. So it's kind of ironic that Indiana won Saturday in the same kind of fashion as they did against Michigan. Maybe that's just, the secret for Indiana. They can't play well offensively for 3.5 quarters. That's how you beat a top 10 team. Obviously joking, but it really does go back to the defense and the fact that they were able to force turnovers at correct times. Yes, Penn State made a lot of mistakes as well, doinking the 25-yard field goal at the end of the half, missing another field goal in the third quarter. And really the difference is Indiana, for once, was the team, because no one's going to play perfect, but Indiana was the team that capitalized on Penn State's mistakes instead of vice versa. And I think that was the biggest difference to where you look at some of these other games where Indiana's been so close but couldn't win. One, a lot of those times, especially go back to the Wilson era, they didn't have a defense. So yes, the offense could look great, but it just didn't matter because the defense was going to give up even more, and they were eventually going to collapse. And two, more recently in the Allen era, Indiana was the team that would make the costly mistakes. It would be Indiana not being ready for an onside kick. It would be Indiana, having against Michigan. I know they weren't top 10, still a top 25 team last year, getting dumb penalties to wipe out a big punt return or a fumble recovery, which a couple of holding calls in that one. And so even though Indiana still made mistakes, Penn State couldn't capitalize on them, and Indiana did capitalize on the Nittany Lions mishaps.
One thing to your point, Jack, about Indiana being outgained by a huge amount, I saw a really amusing stat on Twitter last night that Penn State outgained IU 488 to 211 yards, which is just incredible to lose. According to College Football Reference, there is only one other time since 2000 that a losing team, a team had 147 yards. The winning team had 225 yards or less, and somehow beat the team with 475 yards. And what was the team in that one other game that also won, being outgained? It was Indiana back in 2004 against Oregon, in a game where Oregon had 495 yards and Indiana only had 198 yards, so even a greater disparity. So I just thought was an incredible stat.
That's the secret. That's how Indiana beats good teams, I guess.
Yeah.
Defense wins championships. Am I right?
I wouldn't try it again against Michigan and Ohio State, though. I'd try something different.
I mean, Michigan's in 2 weeks, so I don't know if Tom Allen's going to try to sabotage the offense, but we'll see. But anyways, I do want to talk about one element kind of sabotage in some of those late game situations, and start with Devin Ford of Penn State. A minute 48 left in the game. Penn State, after Indiana loses the ball, after going 4 plays, doesn't get any yards. IU has just one timeout. Penn State, we're expecting to run out the football. and 4 runs into the end zone. James Franklin wasn't really clear on what he wanted to do there. What should have Penn State done, Jack? And how did you see that whole situation go down that basically gave Indiana another chance to win the game?
We need to have a seminar here for the coaches in the IU Penn State circles with Tom Allen, James Franklin, Nick Sheridan, the Penn State offensive coordinator from Minnesota. That's really good. I'm not going to try to say his name, but deal the ball at the end of the half, guys. Both at the end of the half and at the end of the game. Only bad things can happen when you run the ball when you don't need to run a play. Yes, I know for Indiana at the end of the half, I was a proponent of them trying to throw the ball and trying to score more points. But once you run one play and there's literally 10 seconds left in the half and you're inside your own 20, just kneel the ball. It's not that hard. And for Penn State, you got to be able to know the clock and know the situation at the end of the game and know that even if Indiana calls their one timeout, they can't stop the clock again, and the math works to where you don't need to get a first down. Just kneel the ball, and we're not talking about any of this. But, yeah, it was an absolute gaffe for James Franklin to have his team run a play. It was a gaffe for the guy to score, and it worked out. And it worked out for Indiana. That's just when you look at the types of things that I said. Indiana took advantage of Penn State's mistakes, and Penn State didn't. That's a prime example of it. That's how you win close football games. The team that takes advantage of the other's mistakes wins. And Indiana did that with that, and Penn State couldn't with the muffed squib kick at the end of regulation. At the end of it, though, they keep really damn close to hitting that 57-yarder. So, yeah, it's just a flat-out mistake, and Indiana doesn't win the game without that mistake. That's okay to say. It really is. You don't just get, it was a fake win because Penn State made so many errors and because Penix was short. I was like, one, I don't know if Penix was short. I think you could go either way with it. I'm listening to all arguments. I thought
we're going to talk about that in a minute. Don't get ahead of yourself.
I won't. But the thing is, Indiana's had so many things go wrong in these types of situations for so long. It's okay to just be happy with, okay, a couple stupid things went our way, and that's a big reason why we won. That's fine. You can celebrate that. You're due for some of those. Every once in a while, the pendulum has to swing the other way. That's what we've been saying for decades, right? And for once, it finally did.
Well, and Devin Ford ran it in, but Indiana still had to go 75 yards in a minute 20 with, I think, one timeout. Yeah. So it wasn't easy by any means.
Yeah, I thought the other mistake, the other mistake Penn State made is they should have gone for two.
Yes,
after scoring that touchdown. They should have acknowledged their mistake. Yeah, because if you get the 2-point conversion, it's a 9-point game. Indiana's not scoring twice in a minute 20. That's just, unless something even dumber than what we saw and even crazier than what we saw happens, you're not scoring twice in a minute 20. And that's worth the risk to say, okay, it's just a touchdown, an extra point versus a touchdown, 2-point conversion. They should have absolutely gone for two after scoring the touchdown.
All right. First, Fox might need to invest in a pylon cam. Secondly, you kind of alluded to it there, but I want to hear your initial thought when it happened. And now that you've seen the replays, do you still sit that way? Because watching ESPN, Booger McFarland was adamant that he did not get in, and that Penn State was robbed. And then Big Ten Network was like defending Indiana. I want to hear your initial thoughts and where you are now.
Of course, it was Booger McFarland arguing he was short. That's about the least surprising thing ever. But my initial thought wasn't even that the ball was out of bounds. I thought it was one of the situations where he lost control of the ball and it went through the end zone. So I thought initially it would be a touchback, which obviously that'd be the same outcome, 2-point conversion. That doesn't matter. But looking at the replay, I thought he was short the first couple of times. The more you looked at it, the more I could see maybe it broke the plane barely before it went. But I was just without a pylon cam. It was going to be a very hard call to overturn either way. The one that kind of swayed my thought on it was actually a Pat McAfee video on Twitter where he's explaining. He paused it and you could see the ball kind of crossing the plane. Yes, the angle isn't perfect, and he's explaining right there, the ball has crossed the plane, just the tip of it. Yes, you can make the joke off of that, but just the tip of it had crossed. The ball's not on the ground yet. It's not out of bounds, so that's a touchdown. And that's for me, that would be the closest thing I've been swung against, swayed towards it was a touchdown. But as I said, bleep happens, and normally the bleep goes against Indiana. So even if he was short, I don't care, because you still made all the plays you needed to put yourself in that situation. You still had the 4th and 1 stop. You still had the 75-yard touchdown drive to force overtime. You still had Penix finding Watt Fillier, which is very underrated how good of a catch that was from Watt Fillier in the end zone, pitch and catch that was, to be able just to get the 2-point conversion. To where Indiana did so many good things in that game, especially late in that game, to where you could say, okay, it wasn't a fluke they were in that situation. Therefore, it's okay living with the fact that that call might not have been right. Right? It wasn't as if they lucked into that win. That was still a win that they fought and earned on so many different levels.
Jack, I mean, the other element, obviously, to those late game situations was the IU offense suddenly, for the final drive of that fourth quarter, and then in overtime, looked like the offense we expected all year long. Is that should IU fans take that as this is what we're going to see going forward, or was it kind of a fluke? The Penn State defense was tired. On the fourth quarter drive, they were trying to sit back and give IU yards. What are your takeaways from that fourth quarter drive in overtime for the IU offense having so much success?
Well, one, I don't think Penn State was tired because they were on the sideline the entire game. And two, I'm not really sure that they were playing prevent defense of any sort anyways, because you looked at the drive right before the 75-yard touchdown drive. Shaka Toney was an absolute monster and disrupted literally anything that IU was trying to do. And Penn State knew that at that point they were getting pressure, just their 4-man rush, so there wasn't really a need for them to blitz. And even in that drive, Penix did a great job of staying in the pocket and making plays over guys that were basically, crashing in on him, trying to sack him. There's no other way to say it other than that. So his pocket presence was really good in that drive. I'm not too worried about the IU offense long term. Obviously, there was a lot of issues you need to work out. I'm not sure it was my biggest issue for the offense going into the game was I was worried about the offensive coordinator change and how this and how the play calling would be. I thought it was generally fine. I guess you could have ran the ball a little bit more in the second half, but the few times they did, it didn't really work. Plus, you never had the ball, so you can only run so many plays if you can't stay on the field anyways. But the biggest thing is Penix just looked out of sync for much of that game. He missed Watt Fillier wide open on a vertical that would have been a touchdown. He missed Ty Freifogel a couple times in the first half to where he just kind of looked off. And to me, that goes back to him not playing a game for a full year and just being rusty and having to get back in the flow of actually playing a live football game. So I'm not too worried about it. I think the last drive kind of snapped Penix out of it, gave him a confidence boost to where he knows, okay, I'm good, I can do this, and you should be fine moving forward. But I'd put it about I'm saying I'm about 7.5, about 75% confident the offense will be able to figure things out. But there were definitely some question marks there that need to be ironed out. Everything that went wrong is fixable. That's the good news for IU football.
Well, before we let you go, Jack, I don't want to look over Rutgers because they did look good against Michigan State. But looking ahead to Michigan, Joe Milton looked really good in a lot of facets of the game in, I believe, his first career start against Minnesota. Sean Clifford had over 100 rushing yards against Indiana this week. Should we be concerned about Indiana's inability to defend a dual threat quarterback with Joe Milton coming to town in 2 weeks?
Absolutely. That to me has been the biggest issue with Tom Allen's defense. There haven't been many since he's been on campus, but the inability to consistently stop the quarterback run. With the 4-2-5 scheme, especially if you're not going to spy the quarterback, there's only 6 guys in the box. And yes, you can take away the running backs, which Indiana was able to do against Penn State, but there's only so many men you have there, and there just seems to be a trend, let's call it, of Indiana forgetting to pick up the quarterback and forgetting to keep a tab on, to keep him in the pocket and to keep him running. We saw it with Sean Clifford this year. Last season, Clifford did it again. Brian Lewerke, of all people, made big plays for Michigan State. Nebraska stayed in the game with Noah Vedral, who's at Rutgers now, and I believe it's Luke McCaffrey. I know it's one of the McCaffrey brothers that filled in late in that Nebraska game, and it's been an issue for Indiana year after year after year, to where, yes, that's absolutely going to be something that Michigan's going to game plan for, try to use, and Tom Allen's going to have to figure out a way to try to slow down. Maybe because Michigan doesn't have a Pat Fryermuth type of tight end, you use the Husky with so Brian Fitzgerald as more of a spy guy, to where you can just have an athletic dude to track the quarterback. But against the Penn State, you can't really do that because you need him, because that's your best chance to try to slow down Pat Fryermuth, who is one of the best tight ends in the country. And for the most part, Indiana did a fairly good job of that aside from the wide open touchdown he called the first drive of the game. So, yes, to try to keep it short, yes, that will definitely be something to watch, and something that will absolutely be an issue, I would expect, against Michigan in a couple of weeks.
A couple more questions for you, Jack, before you got to go. I want to look big picture. I mean, we know how important in the moment the game was. We know the history, first victory over a top 10 team since 1987 in 33 years, only second victory over Penn State ever, and first top 25 victory in the Tom Allen era. What can this program build off it? What does it mean going forward this season? And just for Indiana football in general, you as someone that covered IU football in the last 4 years and has been around it for most of your life.
It means a whole lot. There's no other way to get around it. Even if they weren't to beat Michigan, Ohio State, or Wisconsin the rest of the year, just go 5-3, win the rest of the games you're supposed to win. That's huge for Indiana. That's something that we haven't been able to say during my lifetime, and even a decade into my lifetime, or before my lifetime, to where Indiana beat a legit football team. They didn't just to have a successful year, win the 3 non-conference games, and then beat Rutgers, Maryland, and whatever crappy Big Ten West team you got. It was more than that. It was more than even last year with the 8-win season, which I don't want to say that wasn't important. It was absolutely huge for Indiana to win 8 games, but it was missing that signature win over a top 10, top 15 team, to where you can point to and say, yes, they beat a really good football team that week. No matter what happens the rest of this season, you can point to that Penn State game and say they beat a really good football team in 2020. And it's a memory that Indiana fans are going to have for a very long time, that no matter what happens the rest of the year, it's going to be looked as a very positive, when you think of good memories of Indiana football, that for me is absolutely the first thing that you look at now as an Indiana football fan, unless you were alive in the 80s and could remember some of those games.
Yeah, I mean, how does that change your outlook on this season? You mentioned 5-3, which I think a winning season without non-conference games would be incredible for Indiana football. But does that change your expectations when this team does go to Wisconsin, or this team hosts Michigan, or is Purdue playing well against Iowa? Does that change your opinion? What do you think now after week 1 of Big Ten play of Indiana's schedule?
It's interesting because I think Michigan and Wisconsin looked way better than I expected them to. Without Jack Cohen, I know Mertz was highly recruited, but I wasn't sure how that was going to work out. Obviously, he goes out 2021, 248 yards, was a baller. And yes, I know he tested positive for COVID, but that means he'd still be back by December 5th. So that doesn't really impact the IU game too much, I would imagine. Michigan, I thought Minnesota was going to beat Michigan. I will go on the record and say I was completely wrong on that one, that Minnesota would beat Michigan. The Wolverines just steamrolled them from the point of attack. They dominated the line of scrimmage, and anytime Minnesota made that a game, Michigan pushed the lead back out. They really just never really let Minnesota get within in the second half, get within a score of them. And it was really impressive and really un-Harbaugh-like from Michigan to have that type of what's the word I'm looking for, just guts, and be able to respond to Minnesota trying to get back to that game and just not letting them do it. So, and then Purdue obviously did look good against Iowa. I think Iowa might just be having some problems with Kirk Ferentz and all that stuff. So I don't want to speculate too much on that front of it. So I think the schedule looks tougher than it did a week ago. And even though Indiana beat Penn State, I'm not going to go out and say, oh, they can just beat any team any week right now. Obviously they can, but I'm not going to say, honestly, just because they beat Penn State, they're going to beat Michigan and Wisconsin also in the same season. I think you got to take it step by step. If you could win one of those games, that would be absolutely monumental. But even if you lose to both those teams and go 5-3 and win your 9th game, go 6-3, that's a season you can look back as wildly successful. You'd be a top 25 team. You'd go to a good bowl game. You would have a chance to go 7-3 in a 10-game season. If you can do that, I think I'm giving them like an A+ of a season, even without another statement win. They already have the statement win they needed.
A really quick final question for you, Jack. Bloomington was crazy on Saturday night, and we saw so many different people's reactions. I love seeing Dr. Clavio screaming on the floor and broke his door. Just in that moment, that overtime, the announcement from Rod Snodgrass that the call stands. What was your reaction? Did you break anything? Were you able to hold your composure? Just curious to know what that night was like for you personally.
I was actually producing a Kentucky football postgame show during it, so I had it on the TV. I'm going back and forth between working and I'm watching it, and the hosts are like telling me when I should be looking at the TV and stuff like that. And I was told, I haven't listened back to it, but I was told what I was yelling was, which luckily I didn't curse at all, which was good, but what I was yelling made it through the control room and onto the mics. So that's what happened pretty much. I was a nervous wreck the entire time. Even though I picked Indiana to win the game, the way the game was going with the defense, I thought the defense was going to collapse. Like, starting at the end of the second quarter, I was just waiting for the defense to collapse. I didn't think they were going to win, especially after Hendershot dropped that ball to where if he catches it and he goes a long way, might have scored a touchdown on that. Maybe Indiana wins this game by 2 scores, and we aren't talking about all the craziness at the end of it. But yeah, that's basically how I watched it. That I came back and I watched the whole game on Sunday to where I really got a better feel for it instead of trying to watch it and the Kentucky game at the same time. But yeah, that's basically what I was doing when it was going on. It was fun.
Oh, sounds like an experience. Certainly a night and a game that we will never forget. And Jack, really appreciate you coming on to break it down. I know college basketball season's coming up too, and that's your sport. So we will definitely have you back.
He's
on.
ready.
Oh, man,
if you're listening to this on the podcast, he's rubbing his hands together.
Ready.
He's ready to go.
I have heard Jack with some incredible rants on Indiana basketball, and I know there's going to be more ups and downs this season, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Jack, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Anytime.
All right, that does it for our episode of Unpaid Interns. We will be back later in the week. Until then, for Jack and Austin, I'm Griffin. We'll talk to you later.